And I did not know at the time that this gentleman had stabbed himself, and it was cold in Illinois. And I remember seeing a lot of steam, and I thought he was smoking, and I was actually looking for a cigarette. I'm like, there's a cigarette here somewhere. Let's put that out. I had no concept of what I had gotten into with that.
And the steam was the blood.
The steam was his blood. That was, and I watched the life go out of his eyes. That was the first time that had ever occurred. So that was very transformative, early in my career.
Angela Bonneville, welcome to My Journey with a Badge.
Thank you.
Before we get started, I wanted to share a brief overview of your law enforcement career. You began your law enforcement career in September of 1994 as a police officer with the Palatine, Illinois Police Department. Your assignments during the course of your career included the Tactical Unit, Crime Prevention, and Bike Patrol. You were a CIT officer, a DARE instructor, and the School Resource Officer at William Fremd High School. Additionally, you served as the Vice President of your Collective Bargaining Unit and held a board position with the Palatine Police and Fire Benevolent Association. You retired in September of 2019. Thank you for agreeing to share your story with us.
Absolutely.
So first question out of the box, why did you decide to pursue a career in law enforcement, and why did you choose the Palatine Police Department?
I chose a career in law enforcement during college. I went to a community college in my hometown of Galesburg and happened to take a criminal justice class, and I was hooked. And then I moved up to the Chicago area and went into Loyola University Chicago, not knowing what I was going to go in. And they had a criminal justice program, so I grabbed onto that. And one of my professors said, you would be an amazing fit for law enforcement. Mainly because I wanted a job that you could go out and do whatever, without having to be behind a desk and really interact with people. So he was probably the main person who steered me in this direction.
So how'd you end up at Palatine?
Palatine was the second or third department I applied for, and I was hired by both of the other ones directly after Palatine. So they were the first one to call for the academy that year.
So let me ask you, they were the first one to call you. Mm-hmm. Were they your first choice?
Yes.
Oh, they were. So it worked out perfect for you.
Yes.
So describe the Palatine Police Department when you came on. You remember about how big it is? And, for those watching and listening, where's Palatine in relation to Chicago?
Sure. Palatine is a northwest suburb of Chicago. It is about 45 minutes from the downtown area. And Palatine, when I started in 94, was about 85 people, sworn. And we had a smaller town. I want to say it was more like in the 45,000 population mark. So that's how it started and ended quite a bit larger at the end. I think we had 115 sworn when I left.
So when you come on in 94, talk about the equipment specifically as an officer. What'd you have on your belt? What'd you carry in 1994?
The one I remember most specifically is the male-only bulletproof vests, which were not super comfort for women. I'm trying to remember. On the belt, we had our gun. We had a couple of mags. We had one handcuff holder and a PR-24 holder. That was it back then.
Yeah, the one handcuff holder, that was standard back then. If you wanted more than one set of handcuffs, you had to go out on your own.
Right.
And by now, you see guys these days, they must have 4 or 5 handcuffs all tucked away in pouches.
Yep.
So you go to an academy. What academy do you go to, and is that residential or is it a commuter academy?
It was a residential academy at the Illinois State Police Academy.
So that's down in Springfield. Mm-hmm. And how long is that at the time?
It was 10 weeks at the time.
Did you go with anybody else from Palatine by chance?
I did. We had 5 individuals hired at the same time. 4 of us were new and 1 was a lateral. So I went with 4 other gentlemen and we called ourselves the Rainbow Coalition.
Why is that?
white man, black man, Hispanic man, and female.
Did everybody graduate?
We did.
Perfect. So, any interesting stories from the academy?
Probably none for none for video.
Troopers or municipal class super?
It was a municipal class, and I will say, because I was never in the military, it was a paramilitary run organization. So for me, it was different because it was very structured, and we had to make our beds a certain way. We had to write memos for everything. It was definitely a great place to get into shape, and the food was horrible.
The males are in the squad bays. What about the females?
Yes.
The squad bay also. How many females were in your class?
There were 5.
Okay.
And that is, I was in sports growing up, but that was the first time that we would all shower in the same showering facilities. And for women, that was a little different back then. So it was challenging.
1994. So I'm going to guess that you probably weren't the first female at the Palatine Police Department by
It was the third that I was aware of.
the third full-time police officer in the
Correct.
Palatine Police Department.
And the first to reach 20 years.
No kidding. Wow. So you graduate the academy and you go to the Palatine Police Department. Do you remember your first day, maybe your first week on the job?
I do. We actually started before the academy. So we were trained in range. We did a lot of the book reading and a lot of ride-alongs. And then we had a festival right before our academy kicked off. And they sent all of us over to the festival in uniform, guns loaded, without any training, and said, don't do anything.
How long before you went to the academy were you actually doing work or training? And
It was a week.
It was a week before.
Yes, an introduction week.
Okay. Which I feel like that's pretty standard. I don't know about putting you out for a festival, though. That's the first time I've heard something like that.
Yes.
But I feel like that's pretty standard. So what about field training for you? What was that experience like?
Field training was 5 to 6 different officers that I had throughout the time on all of the ships. My first field training officer, Craig Leslie-Young, is the person that I write reports like. Definitely had more of a demeanor from him. Learned a lot from him as a field training officer. I had one who didn't make it through his 20-year career, and he went off the deep end at some point in time. So he was challenging to be in the car with. Had some mental health issues for sure. And then I had a man who, we called him Frenchie. He was the one designated to have conversations with female police officers to see if they could handle the job. So he was one of my favorite coworkers for a very long time. But I do remember that conversation vividly.
What was that? What's this? What's the conversation for female officers?
Making sure that they would come to aid of other people, making sure that they would fight if we had to fight, making sure that we understood what the job entailed. I'm not sure if they had that with the male officers. I do not believe they did. But he literally went and reported to the other officers, which I found out many years later by some of the coworkers I had, that, she'll be all right. She's good. And I was in a fight probably in the first couple of months of my career. And because I fought, that went well for me moving forward.
By no means is a fight on the street the same thing as a fight in the academy, but in the State Police Academy, you did put on strap-on boxing gloves and you wrestled for a couple of minutes and then you boxed for a couple of minutes after that. So,
We did.
So it wasn't like you'd never been hit in the face before.
True story. That's a true story. And they did absolutely want all of us to have that experience. So.
Any stories other than Frenchie and that talk? Any traffic stops or interactions during your field training period where you were like, holy smokes, I didn't realize this is what it was going to be like?
Yes. I had 2 situations. One was a traffic stop that ended up being a pursuit. And the gentleman that we were pursuing, unbeknownst to us, was a Navy SEAL who was suicidal and went into the adjoining town ran his car into his ex-girlfriend's townhouse and stabbed himself in the chest and killed himself. So that was my first major incident.
And you're in training at the
I was in training it was New Year's Eve, funny enough. It was probably a month into the career.
Are you driving or are you
I
in?
was.
So you're driving and you're the primary unit in the pursuit?
I was.
And how's your FTO handling that? Was it all good?
He was as calm as he could be.
Yeah.
He took over the radio transmission and told me what to do. And I think the pursuit piece went great, but what I remember is getting there, and I did not know at the time that this gentleman had stabbed himself, and it was cold in Illinois. And I remember seeing a lot of steam, and I thought he was smoking, and I was actually looking for a cigarette. I'm like, there's a cigarette here somewhere. Let's put that out. I had no concept of what I had gotten into with that.
And the steam was the blood.
Steam was his blood. And I watched the life go out of his eyes. That was the first time that had ever occurred. So that was very transformative, early in my career.
So only a couple of months on the job? Mm-hmm. Had you ever seen anything like that before?
No.
And afterwards, you get back in the car with your FTO, things wind down. Is there a conversation about that? Is there a referral to maybe formalize it, a referral to any sort of mental health service just to check in and make sure you're okay? Anything?
We had nothing like that at the time. The main emphasis for the next 3 shifts that I worked was on learning how to write a report for that.
So you guys really never any in-depth conversation?
No.
Wow. Did you say there was 2 stories during field training?
Yes. The other major incident that happened while I was on field training was we had a Sikh temple in Palatine, and it was pretty well attended. And midnight shift, I come in, and my FTO and I were sitting at roll call, and it came out that there was a stabbing at the Sikh temple. Somebody had taken the life of a 7-year-old boy.
Wow.
So that was also within the first couple of months. I was on field training for about 10 weeks. So those were the 2 major incidents that happened during that time that really transformed.
And you responded to that call as well?
Did.
And I think it's important to recognize that when you're in training, there's a lot of call jumping. As a field training officer with a new officer, when something like that comes out, generally speaking, your field training officer will jump that call to get you exposed to it. So here in a very short period of time,
Yes.
you're experiencing a couple of very traumatic incidents. So when you show up on the scene, is that child still there, or were the medics on scene?
Everything was still on scene, and the child was deceased, and the individual who had taken his life had schizophrenia and was still on the scene and just covered in blood. He had used I don't remember what they call it, but some kind of a samurai type sword.
Wow. Mm-hmm. And again, no mental health check-ins, no in-depth conversations. And after a couple of months, you have to be thinking, holy smokes.
I was not sure what I had gotten into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you finish field training and you go out on your own. Mm-hmm. And as a patrol officer, bread and butter of patrol, traffic stops. Mm-hmm. So you're out there making traffic stops on your own. Are there any traffic stops that stand out in your mind when you look back at your career?
Yes, one in particular, and I think we'll get into this a little bit, but we tend to have that sixth sense that we build up. Mm-hmm. And after a few years of being on the job, I was on midnight shift, and I stopped a car at the very edge of our town. And back then, you didn't call for backup unless you needed backup. And that was kind of everybody's clue, get there and get there fast. Mm-hmm. Before I stopped this car, I had that sixth sense, and so I called for backup. And the individual was, 6'5", just a really big man who was drunk. And thankfully, my backup got there, and 2 other cars arrived as well very shortly afterwards. And he was arrested. We had to force him into handcuffs, and we had to force him into the car. And he later said, "I was going to fucking kill you." He goes, "You're lucky you have backup. I was going to kill you." So.
Any idea what caused you to get that feeling?
No idea. But I've trusted that. That's something I've trusted throughout my career, and that's something I encourage all of us to do.
What'd you end up arresting him for?
DUI.
Okay. And his
DUI.
background? What was his background? Did he have a criminal history background? Do you recall?
I don't recall.
Yeah.
I don't recall. I just remember the shock of somebody. And he was not so drunk that he didn't know what he was saying.
Sure.
He was angry. He was upset. He was fighting all of us. I have no doubt that that would have gone very poorly for me had I not called him back up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you kind of give me that 30,000 foot perspective of your career, kind of walk me through your career path?
I started off in patrol, and for several months, I would be pulled into a tactical unit and a drug unit, which is something for our agency. I saw a lot of female officers get pulled into because we were young and we were new to the area. So I did work on a tactical unit with one of the old guys, driving around and looking for drugs and guns and all the stuff. Then I went to patrol for a while, and then eventually ended up putting in for crime prevention, which was an office job because I planned on going back to school, and it fit really well with my hours for school. So I was in crime prevention for 4 years. And during that time, I did the DARE officer friendly. That's part of what all of that was part of in crime prevention. And then I went back on the street, and I was on midnights for 3 or 4 years. That was a big shift from public education to seeing no one. And the people I did see were usually the ones that were coming back to the police station with me. After that, I went to the SRO, School Resource Officer in Fremd High School. That was one of my favorite assignments. And it was wonderful to be in a place that people weren't calling you for bad things all the time. You know, a lot of times I was going in and teaching classes. I was mentoring some kids. I was helping kids who had no money for lunches, or, you know, kids who were homeless, try to navigate some things outside of that in their life. So that was my fun time. About that time, I ended up being pregnant and having my first child. So I did go back onto the street after that. And I spent most of the rest of my career on midnights or on day shift.
So you said it sounds like the SRO spot was kind of the high point of your career, the thing that you enjoyed the most.
It was.
So what is is there specific training for that position, and what are the qualifications to roll into something like that?
You do have to be on a police department for 2 to 4 years, depending on the agency. And you have to be a juvenile police officer. So there is a 40-hour training associated with that. And then there's another 40-hour training associated with being an SRO. Back then, the laws were very different than they are now. So I would assume that has shifted some since then. But that is what I had to do. And then I had to go through an interview process with the school. So they had 3 different officers from the Palatine Police Department to choose from, and we all had interviews, and we had to show a resume and background, and I was chosen for that position.
Do you have any stories from your time as an SRO, or any incidents that stand out in your mind from your time in the high school?
Lots of school fights. Lots of kids who were starting to say, I'm going to lawyer up. That was the time frame of much of that starting. Lots of things that I remember are really more individual to people. You know, once again, I don't think I had been exposed to the disparity between the really, really wealthy people that lived in Inverness and our town next door, and then some people who had very little in the Arlington Heights area and the Hoffman Estates area. So navigating that when there were so many people that had nothing in the school and so many kids who left their things everywhere, that was new to me. But I saw it as a great opportunity to mentor the kids and some of the parents, which was one of my favorite parts of that job.
Lots of school fights, you said.
Lots of school fights.
So is there ever a time with those school fights that you're brought in on to participate in the, I guess, for lack of a better term, disciplinary process or helping to stop that fight? Do any of them ever become criminal incidents, or is it this is an internal disciplinary issue with the school? And how did that sit with you, that process?
It started out, many of the people were arrested. Back in the time where I was in the SRO position, that's how we handled it. I was allowed at that time to interview kids on scene without parents. That was part of what I did. Towards the end of that position, some of the laws were starting to shift, and many of those fights were then handled more internally. And I was part of the process. I was actually part of the disciplinary group. I was the disciplinary office. I was the group of people that made those choices. I just was not handling them criminally unless someone in the fight wanted to press charges.
So outside of being an SRO, when you look back at your career, is there a particular call or incident or incidents that stand out in your mind when you look back?
Several.
Okay. Good.
And I'm actually going to start at the end of my career.
Okay.
I had a very active last few months. And the one that I remember most vividly, we had a citizen who stabbed and attempted to kill his wife one Sunday morning. And he lived in an apartment complex. As we get the call, he takes off with a friend in the car. So it was probably a 3-hour process from the time that he stabbed his wife to the time that we found him. But we were able to locate him in a neighborhood, and I ended up being the lucky person who had, looked at that area. I'd worked that area for a long time and said, this is a good spot to at least try out. And as I turned a corner, he turned a corner. He was still holding the bloody 12-inch knife that he had stabbed and gutted his wife with, and was just standing there staring at me. I was as close as you and I are right now. So that was something that I remember being more shocking. And I was happy that it was something I handled instead of one of the newer people. But that was definitely one of the highlights, being able to catch somebody for attempted murder.
So, but you can't leave us hanging there. So you're face to face, maybe 6 to 8 feet apart. And
Yes.
what happens?
I drew my gun immediately because I hadn't done that because there was a fence hiding, that whole area, and backed up and, gave him commands. He actually listened to all the commands. But all of my coworkers came running from the side. It was almost like a movie. They came running from the side, would tackled him, and he was very compliant at that point. But that is something that I definitely recall. I was probably as close as I could have been should he have chosen to do something different to shooting someone.
It's amazing to me that as much training as we get, that 90% of the time we just regress back to the tackle. That's the go-to
Yes.
tactic that we use to get
Yes.
somebody into custody. So you said there were several
Yes.
incidents that you remember.
One of the other incidents that I remember I was part of afterwards, I think you had mentioned this earlier, Palatine Police they're known for the Brown's chicken murders, which happened the year before I came on duty. So I was about 10, 15 years into my career, and one of the girlfriends of the suspect ended up coming into us and telling us her story. So I got to be on the protective detail with the person who broke that story. For our department, that was a really big deal because we had a task force that really worked through this. We had an FBI individual who was hired to our task force to help us through all of that. So for many years, the other thing is we had to hear from citizens, why are you stopping me for the speeding ticket? Why aren't you out solving the Brown's chicken murders? And after that date, I was able to say, we did. I was part of that. So I spent the night with this individual in a hotel room, and I was not interacting with her. That was not something I was going to do, but boy, did I hear a lot from her as we spent the night together, and I protected her overnight before we went to court the next day. So that was an interesting piece of Palatine history that I was part of.
So can you give a little bit of back? I know it happened the year before you got there, but it really is a part of the agency's history.
It is.
Can you kind of give a little bit for those that, I mean, everybody in Chicago area is familiar with it, but I don't know about outside the Chicago area. A little bit of background on that, what it actually was?
Sure. It was a 7-person murder that happened at a Brown's Chicken establishment in Palatine. It happened during the winter. It was January, I believe, of 1993, and the suspect had been in the restaurant as it was closing, and ordered everybody who was working and the owners into 2 separate freezers and shot and killed all of them. So we did not find that out until the next overnight. One of the children's parents had called to report that individual missing. And funny enough, my husband, who was a Palatine police officer at the time, was one of the first on scene who found the murders. But one of the most interesting things about that, one of our police officers, one of the old guys, grabbed a piece of chicken that he thought may at some point in time end up being helpful. We did not have DNA evidence at the time, and it ended up being very instrumental in the case and helping us to prove that the individuals that killed the 7 workers was guilty. It was a former employee.
So a little more detail on. So the girlfriend comes forward. What does she say? And then through that process, how are the offenders identified, and what ultimately ends up happening to them, if you know?
Yes. The girlfriend, they hadn't dated for a very long time, but she came to the agency and said, I can't carry this with me anymore. She was able to tell us that her ex-boyfriend, who was one of the 2 suspects that ended up being arrested, had confessed to her that he and another individual, both from Fremd High School, where I was an SRO at one point in time, they were the ones that ended up going in and killing the individuals. The motive was money and to do something that they've never done before. They were in special ed classes at the time. They just got lucky that no one talked, or we didn't have any evidence. I know one of them was a suspect for a long time because he was a former employee. But it ends up they were arrested, they were indicted, they were convicted, and they are in prison, both of them.
Was their intent, was it ever determined if their intent was to actually just not commit the robbery, but actually to commit those murders?
I believe that in the end, that is something that was discussed with not only Annie, which was the girlfriend that I was sitting with, but that was something that one of the 2 suspects finally did admit to.
Do you recall how old they were at the time when this happened?
Just out of high school.
Wow.
18, 19 years old, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you have another story before we move on?
I think those are 2 of the big ones.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a lot of them. I will say not a story, but a series of things. And that was, I think one of the things that was most impactful on me was a lot of suicides. And, you were an officer as well at one point, and all of the holidays usually brought a lot more individual suicides. So I will say, as part of my story and towards the end of my career, I had 2 back-to-back suicides, and that was when I started to notice that my mental health was being impacted by this. One day, it was a 70-year-old gentleman who took his life outside, and we were actually called to the scene, and it was dispatched as an active shooter. So we had all the adrenaline going, had no real idea what we were walking into, but it ended up he was suicidal, he was sick, and had taped a note to his chest and had gone outside so his wife wouldn't see him kill himself. That was at the end of my shift on, let's say, a Tuesday. Wednesday morning, I get there, and the first call I have right out of the box is a suicide of a young man who is the same age as my stepson. And I was really good at sitting with the families on calls like that. So that's normally the role I took. And I remember the heaviness of having to listen to that family talk about their son, that he didn't even live at the house anymore. He actually went to the house, went downstairs, had a couple of drinks, got his father's gun out of his safe and killed himself. And just listening to the stories that the family had. And the most impactful piece of that is the mom gave me a blanket and said, I know he's dead, but I can't picture him being down there cold and lying there on his own. Can you please go down and put this blanket on it? And that call, those 2 in a row, really got to me. I do remember getting physically ill at some point later that day. I remember very, very emotional time for a couple of days. And once again, I think having those 2 back to back, as well as the young man being the same age as my stepson, both of those really got to me. So I was looking at it as a mother, because I had had children by then too. So I would say that all the suicides were impactful, but those 2 in particular at the end of my career were definitely ones that I'll never forget.
So have you ever done something that you later realized probably wasn't the best idea?
I did, and I ended up getting called out on it.
Okay.
When I was towards the end of my career, one of the things that Palatine Police and many other agencies started doing is putting very large tow fees on all the different cars that we towed. We had a lot of individuals in Palatine that were not from the United States and not citizens, and so there were a lot of no valids and suspended licenses. So I did, more often than I was caught, give people breaks and have somebody else drive the car away, because regardless of what my political views were, that's $1,000 between tows and tow fees just to get your car out of the pound after you've been arrested. So once the cameras became a thing in our squad cars, I did have my chief call me in and say, this is not policy. Why did you do this? I explained everything I just said, and my integrity was called on the line. And that was something that bothered me a lot, because I did have a lot of integrity, and I thought that I was doing the best thing for the individuals. And I was formally told that regardless of what my beliefs were on that was not something I could do. So that is one of the things that sticks with me, and is having my integrity called on the line.
So is there an incident that you wish you had the opportunity to do over again, where you're like, knowing what I know now, I could have done that better?
I think that there are a couple incidents, and I don't know that the incident is the important part, as it was when you're on the job for a long time and you get comfortable. You don't do things the way you should, not the way you're trained. And I do remember, one of the things that goes through my mind on occasion is we had a bank robbery, and it was actually a bank robbery. And I wasn't following protocol the way I would have 10 years prior. Nothing happened. There was no grand, issue that came out of it. But for some reason, that is one of the things that I look back on. If that had gone a different way, if I had not been lucky and the person was already gone, that I absolutely could have been hurt, or I could have gotten somebody else hurt because I wasn't following the protocol. So looking back, that is the one thing that I would say for multiple calls and traffic stumps that we as officers have to stay on for 25 or 30 years. Many of us get lucky, but there are a lot of people who don't. So.
How long did it take you to look back and see that? Were you out of the job? Was it like you clear the call and you're like, oh man, I should have done that differently?
It was at the end of the job when I was writing my report. And, I had to document the things I did, and I was calling myself out on that. As I've gotten comfortable. I definitely need to remember, safety first. Probably in the last 4 or 5 years of my career, I'm sure I was going through some burnout at that point too. But I do remember writing that report and documenting it and calling myself out on it.
What do you consider to be the high point of your career? Some of your best memories?
The people, the roll calls. We, as an agency, would do Toys for Tots every year. So doing things for the individuals in our community that don't have the money. And I would say a lot of times in our agency, we had people going through divorce, people going through illness, people who died of their illnesses. And our agency and something I love to do was be part of helping other people and helping those going through a hard time. So I do remember a lot of great times doing that, fundraisers that we held, just pulling money together at a roll call for a guy who got divorced for the third time. And he had nothing, just things like that. I remember the jokes and the good pranks that we were allowed to do early on in our career that I think towards the end of the career wouldn't have been handled quite the same way.
It is different how over 20, 25 years from the early 90s to, 2010, 2020, the personality of the job changed so much.
It was fun.
Yeah, it was. It still was.
It was fun. And I don't know how to describe that way now.
Yeah. So when you look back, is there someone that you consider to be a mentor, or someone you said, I'd really like to do the job the way that guy or girl does the job?
My field training officer, the first one that I spoke of, Craig Leslie Young, he was a good mentor. He did things by book. He was very regimented and definitely was instrumental in my career. Throughout my career, he didn't retire until the last couple of years of my career. And then I would say Frenchie, he ended up being a commander at the end, but he was a patrol officer with me for a very long time. He's the one who had the conversation with me about being a female officer. But he was funny. He never took the job too seriously. He could talk to anyone, no matter what. And he handled himself throughout his whole career with grace and dignity. And he's someone I've always looked up to, for sure.
So I'm assuming Frenchie is his nickname, not his name. And do you know
Kurt Schroeder.
Do you know the origin of Frenchie?
Yes, but it's probably not appropriate for here.
All right, we'll save his family here there so that everyone will go into it. What's some of the biggest changes that you saw in law enforcement over the course of your career?
I would say, you and I have talked about technology. We've talked about the individuals that started on this job when you and I began the job versus the individuals who start now. We looked at it as a career, as a calling, as a brotherhood. And I think nowadays it is a job. It is a well-paying job, but a lot of times the individuals going into the job now aren't going in for a career. They're going in for a short period of time. So that's definitely been a shift. And I would say the emphasis placed on mental health in the last 10 years has been a huge shift. We didn't talk about mental health. Not one thing was mentioned in my academy about it. And the first 20 years of my career, it was not looked upon well if you had to go for mental health issues, if you had therapy, if you had to go for a fit for duty evaluation. None of those things were talked about. They were whispered about, but they weren't talked about openly at the beginning of my career. And today, I think it's a very different story. You know, they're putting classes in the academy for wellness. They are having annual wellness checks, you know, as part of the Safety Act that came up. They are suggesting that people who are struggling either at home or on the job or both come in and get mental health treatment. So that's been a huge shift over my career.
Do you think that this generation is more open to things like that compared to this new generation compared to our generation?
Yes, 100%. I have definitely heard that there are a good number of people that had started the job in the last 5 years, and they share therapist information. So I think that it is a lot more accepted. I think that their generation grew up with that. And you know, for example, even my children in the last 5-10 years going through school, they've been taught social emotional, you know, learning and how to calm your body down and how to control emotions. That is not something that was part of the vocabulary for us at any point in time. So I do think it's a lot more understood, sorry.
So you bring up your family.
Yes.
You and your husband, both retired police officers. What do you think the impact was? What do you think the impact the job had on your family was?
I will say through both of our careers, my husband and I are both in our second marriage, so divorce was definitely part of the story. My husband began at Palatine, that's how we met, and ended up transferring to the state police. So he had a more regular job hours-wise. He was working 8 to 4 during the time that we had children. I did not always have that luxury, so we had daycare. We had to have contingency plans if one or both of us, you know, were caught up. And I will say we are blessed that I was able to retire right before COVID, because I don't know what we would have done there. You know, no one would have watched our children. and we still both would have ended up having to go in different directions. But I will say our children were raised differently than most people. We didn't allow sleepovers because of the things we had seen in our career. Our kids didn't have cell phones until they were in 8th and 9th grade. They definitely were street smart compared to many of their peers, and had heard us talk over the years about our careers and what we've witnessed. Certainly a lot more now as they're older, but they were raised differently in a lot of ways than kids from a banker or you know, somebody who was in sales.
So the summer of, I'm going to loosely say the summer, maybe it was May of 2020, this whole social justice movement happens. I'm not sure how old your kids were at the time, but did that touch them in any way?
It did. It was interesting when you bring that up. I remember going down Crystal Lake Avenue in the area that we lived, and they had a Black Lives Matter protest. And my kids were in the back seat, and my daughter said, "Hey, can we stop? I want to be part of that protest." And we have always taught our kids to have their own opinions, but to base it on facts. So we went home, we looked up the movement, and at that point, I think we had a pretty good idea of where a lot of the funds were coming for that social justice movement. We discussed that mom and dad, you know, I was retired at the time, my husband was still on the job, that we were police officers. Some of the ways this movement was impacting police officers in general. And, you know, my daughter in 2020, she was 10 years old. So she was looking up these things with me, and we had to have some pretty good conversations. My son had no interest. So I wish I could say that he was more involved. He was not. But my daughter was very interested and involved, and it helped us shape, even today, if she has an opinion or if she hears something from school, she'll come home and we'll sit and we'll look online and we'll look at, reputable sites, and we will make sure that she makes whatever opinion she wants to based on facts.
When you look back, any regrets about your career? Anything you wish you would have done? Anything you wish you would have taken advantage of? Or are you all good?
I'd say overall I'm good. I did go through a period of burnout. I think that's common in our career, but I think that's part of the story that got me to my next chapter. So I will say that while I'm regretful of probably the way other people had to maybe put up with some of the things that happen when we go through burnout, that not a regret so much, just something that I wish I didn't have to impact other people in the way I did.
It's interesting in the private sector. I've found that if you stay with a company for 20 plus years, a lot of them give you kind of a hiatus where you get a couple of months off. And how many cops do we have that probably retire and then 3 months later they're like, oh, I'm good. I could go back. They just needed a hiatus. They didn't need to retire. But like you said, that burnout gets to them and they don't think that they can do it anymore. It's incredible and it's unfortunate. I wish we had something like that where, someone could just take a few months off and kind of recharge their battery. So
funny enough, there is something like that, but it's not looked upon well. We do have officers that now will take that hiatus for mental health reasons. And the problem is manpower and the impact it has on the rest of the agency for a small agency.
Sure.
But certainly some of the larger agencies, that's something they see pretty regularly nowadays.
Yeah. Well, talking about the change, when my wife had our kids, my wife had the kid. The next day I'm working. Yeah. Now there's this everybody FMLA, the spouse not having the child is taking just as much FMLA, which, that's great for the family. That's awesome. But this is a dog-eat-dog profession. Yes. Their coworkers are not happy about that. Right. Because it impacts staffing. Everything revolves around staffing.
So funny enough, my husband had FMLA leave a couple of weeks to a month. I can't remember which one. I had 3 days.
Yeah.
I had the baby.
Yeah.
I was still in the hospital after 3 days.
Yeah. Yeah.
So things have changed.
Yeah. No, they have for sure. So we kind of talked about your long career, very brief conversation about your career, but at some point you kind of make the decision, that burnout's getting to me. It's time to retire. What's that decision process like for you?
All right. Well, that's a little deeper. I went through burnout in the last, I would say 4 or 5 years of my career, and definitely different stages. But there was a time where I really struggled with wanting to go to work. I struggled with wanting to do a good job, with wanting to interact with my coworkers, that was my favorite part of the job for most of my career. At about that same time, we had 3 different police officers who ended up sick. And one of them, it was an autoimmune disorder, and 2 of them cancer. And all 3 of them ended up passing in a pretty short amount of time. One of those was someone on my shift who many of us were close to. And he ended up having glioblastoma, which was a brain cancer that was very aggressive. And I was asked by my chief to be the liaison for his family as he was in hospice. So me and 3 or 4 of his close friends would stay there every night with either Mark was his name, Mark Dollum, Mark's wife, or Mark's mother-in-law. And so I would stay and talk to Kim, which was his wife. And she and I talked one night, and I said, I'm watching my friend die. He was the 3rd person, so he was the 3rd death in a very short period of time. I think I'm done with this. I think I was 46. I was very close to the end of my career. And she said, you've got your license in clinical social work. Why don't you go into private practice? And the next night that I stayed, we talked some more. And she actually made a call to a mutual friend she and I both had. And I actually got a job during that time frame where I was watching my friend die. I was watching how it impacted his family. And I said, I don't want this to happen to me. So after we buried Mark and moved on as an agency, I went into my deputy chief, who ended up being my chief very shortly after, and I gave 6 months notice. I said, I've got 25 years in September. I know I'm not 50, but I'm ready to go. So that started the ball rolling on, my second chapter, one of my chapters. But that was incredibly impactful. The burnout, watching several of our coworkers die of, usually you hear that the fire world has cancer, but a lot of us, we were in an old building and there was asbestos in there. And at that time, that's really what we had thought is, there were a lot of us who were going to end up ill or sick because of that. And that was just a time frame where 3 in a row went pretty quickly.
So that transition, because you're in that second chapter, you worked to maintain, I guess, a connection with first responders. So talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So my last year, I actually started working as a licensed clinical social worker as a individual therapist. And I was working in an agency in Crystal Lake that worked with children and family, school-age kids for the most part. And so I was doing 2 jobs for 3 or 4 months during the summer. Then I retired in September and became full-time. I worked as a counselor for children and families for about a year and a half at this agency because I needed a break. My brain needed to separate the language of the police department. It needed to separate the things that I had done and seen, the stories that I know I would have heard. And it was a great break. So at some point in time, speaking of social justice movements, I started having clients come in that I didn't understand anymore. With a lot of changes when it came to sex and gender and orientation, and that wasn't my world. So I started branching out. Carrie Steiner, who works for First Responder Wellness Center in Lombard, she's the owner of the agency. She would do a lot of trainings for all the different police officers and police departments. I had gone into one of her trainings several years ago, and I said, that's something that I think I could do someday. Turns out she and I ended up connecting at about that time. And one of the services that she was providing was wellness checks for police departments and agencies well before the Safety Act came in. There were definitely multiple agencies in the Chicago area who were very proactive, and they were having each of their officers meet with individuals for 1 hour a year. And they got psychoeducation on common symptoms of trauma, on what happens after we have that big adrenaline rush and the adrenaline dumps. So I started there because I had the career, and it was amazing. I was going in and I was talking shop with all kinds of people, but I was also bringing this other piece that I had been utilizing on the street, but not in the same way. And I decided after a couple of years of doing both jobs, working with the kids and working with the officers, that was my calling, and shifted over to that. and I have been at First Responder Wellness Center since 2021, doing mostly individual therapy with officers who have gone through trauma. So officers who've, been shot, officers who have had to shoot or kill people, a lot of people who've gone through traumatic incidents on the job, and then some who went through trauma, prior to. The agency I work for also sees all first responders. So a lot of firemen, EMS people. I've had a couple of doctors and nurses, teachers who've gone through traumatic incidents, and we work with veterans. And that has been my love and my passion for the last several years.
So if someone wanted to take advantage of this service, do they have to, is there any sort of residency requirement? Is it all in person? How would that work for someone who, say, maybe they're in Ohio and they've been unable to identify a resource near them? Is this something they can take advantage of?
It is. However, because of state laws and some of the policies and procedures between social work and counseling, they will have to look into their state and what's allowed. So I'm going to give a couple of different options for people who are interested, whether they're on the job or retired, because a lot of people come in at that retirement age. Look into insurance first and ask if there's anyone who has first responder background or is trained to work with first responders in their state. That's where I would start. A lot of the states have private pay policies, or not private pay policies, different organizations that will cover any kind of mental health services for first responders or veterans. So that is the second place I would look. Just start with a Google search. And then if you've got some bigger departments in your area, for Illinois, that was Chicago, near us, they have a lot of these resources. The 100 Club, that's definitely a great resource to go. And what they do is they vet individual therapists to make sure that they do have a trauma background and that they have a background in working with first responders. And then that other layer is veterans. I think that one of the agencies that I work for is called Headstrong. And it is one of the not-for-profits that pays for individual and couples and family counseling for veterans. So many veterans are also in this first responder world. So, there's a lot of layers of what might work best for them. But there are plenty of places that they can get insurance to pay for it, or they can go to one of these private pay agencies, even as a retired individual, and they can see somebody and work through some of the trauma that they've seen throughout their life.
What in your mind is the point where you're thinking, early on enough of, hey, you should probably consider reaching out to somebody if you're feeling X and Y? What is that that red flag for you?
The red flag has changed. If you've got a red flag, I'm going to say it might be too far in. I'm going to say for many people in the professions that we're talking about with first responders and veterans, create a relationship with someone, a therapist that you can go to when you need them. Not somebody you have to see on, every week for how many years, but just to process the things we don't want to take to our families, that we don't want to discuss. We don't discuss when we meet car to car. But I will say, for individuals who do start to struggle, we all know what the old guy looks like. And I'm using the old guy because I think it's clear, who is angry all the time, who never has anything positive to say, who really struggles with their identity and what they're doing every single day when they go on the job. That definitely happens at least once for almost every police officer, certainly towards the end of their career. And that shift really does challenge all of us. So I would say absolutely reach out. I did it. That's part of my story and how I was able to talk myself into leaving at age 47 and instead of age 50. I work with officers all the time now, and retired guys who have that same struggle of identity and purpose. And what do I do now? My wife or my husband doesn't want me to be around as much as I am. Some of them go into law enforcement career number 2 because they don't know what else to do. So I would say anyone who's struggling personally or professionally should find someone that they can create that relationship with. Because I promise, when it's red flag after red flag after red flag, we need to have that relationship in order to get the benefit that we really can from that process.
What do you see? Have you seen a trend? Is there something that drives the conversations that you're having? Is it traumatic experiences? Is it that feeling that you're not being treated fairly by your agency? Is it relationships at home? Is there something that stands out in your mind as this is what I see the most?
All of those things. Dr. Olivia Johnson, she's done a lot of work in the area of psychological suicide assessment. And she has the fatal 10 that she has mentioned. And the one that we see, from our police perspective is the trauma that happens on the job. Definitely the betrayal or sense of betrayal of administration not having our backs. Certainly feeling like we at least in Palatine, we had to have a 4-year degree to come onto the agency. And we come feeling like we have all these ideas, and then we're fit into a little box and asked to do the same job that people, 20, 30 years ago were asked to do. There's a lot of shifts that happen in that. But I will say the one that we don't acknowledge enough is the home life. People have problems at home. Maybe because of this job, maybe not. But the divorces, the kids who are sick, the affairs, the drinking problems, all of those things we do come to the job with. And that is one thing that I will say that I've seen more than anything else with first responders is our home lives of us being young people probably made us pretty comfortable with chaos and structure and some of the things that we see. And maybe you saw that as a Marine as well. But then we pick careers where there's chaos a lot. We have to be hyper vigilant. We have to pay attention. And I don't think that's an accident. I think that's something we're trained.
I talked to, you hit on a couple of points. One of the guys that I sat down with and interviewed, Scott Mayer Hoffer, and I'm kind of paraphrasing. He talked about, solving other people's problems 8 hours a day, 12 hours a day on his shift every day. And then when he came home, he just didn't want to deal with it.
Yeah.
He just didn't want to deal with the problems. And he said it had an impact on his marriage. And he was specific to point out, I'm not saying that's why I got divorced, but there was a contributing factor. I just didn't want to deal with it.
Right.
And I think that, talking about the impact the job has on the home life and how so many people just aren't aware enough to be able to identify that and point it out. And it's, the job definitely takes a toll. And
It does.
And if there was trauma or experiences you didn't deal with before coming on the job, it's only going to get 10 times worse.
Right.
It really is.
And it's funny because communication, in my opinion, is one of the things as a married couple, you have to practice and you have to keep coming back to that and learning new skills. We're great at it on the police side. We're not so good when we come home because we are sick and tired of doing it, 8 or 12 hours a day. So that happens a lot.
Yeah. I know you're still connected to the job, but do you actually miss the job itself of being a police officer?
I do not. As a matter of fact, I feel very blessed not to be in the job anymore, especially with a lot of the people that I work with now. I have learned a lot after the job that I probably, if we had known all of that early on, it would have changed a lot of things for me. But I do not miss the job. I'm grateful that there are people that serve, and grateful that people have taken up the badge and that they want to do this career.
So do you have any words of advice, parting words of advice for anybody that might be watching or listening?
I do. I would say for the younger officers that are coming on the job and their families, there are a lot of resources that we didn't have. There are books out there. One that comes to mind is called "I Love a Cop, I Love a Fireman." Really good author that talks about what this career looks like over a 25 or 30-year period with a family. I think that going to trainings that are actually meant for law enforcement and first responder families, which are popping up all over the place. I think that would be a wonderful opportunity for families to understand that they're not alone and to understand that this is a special job. It is going to cause some challenges, and we in law enforcement and first responder world can't do it alone. So getting the family involved, giving them education, giving them a sense of what can happen and go wrong and what that might look like, so that everyone in the family could be part of the process of writing that and putting it in a different direction. For people who've been on the job for a while and are going through burnout, you and I have already approached this, but burnout is something that can shift. It took us a while to get into that space, but there are a lot of great tools to get us out of the space. And we have a choice at some point of, are we going to use alcohol? Are we going to use, gambling? Are we going to use pornography? Or are we going to learn some healthy strategies, things like exercise and breathing techniques and mindfulness and meditation? And we can show up on the job again and find fulfillment and show up in our families and be better people. So for everyone in that area, I would say reach out for help if you're struggling, because there is a lot of hope for people who want to stay in the job. And then my advice for the retiring and retired is it's never too late to go back and, try to work through some of this. I'm not sure about you, but I'm positive that over the 6 or 7 years since I've been off the job, I still see the things. I still smell some of the smells. I still have some of the sensations and feelings that came up over the years. And when they come up for me now, I work through them. When I first got off the job, I didn't do that. And it would turn into, you probably could tell on my face if I had a trigger come up, because I wouldn't interact. I would isolate. I would not want to be with my family. And nowadays, I might take a minute or two and kind of work through that memory for myself. And then I move on just like every other day. And that's possible for all of us. I think a lot of us are afraid of opening that Pandora's box, but it gets opened. It's just a matter of if we do it on purpose or if it happens randomly when we least expect it. So,
Angela, great information. And I really want to thank you for sitting down with me today and sharing your journey with the badge. Thank you.
Thank you.